Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Monday Q&As. So let's wrap this up. Acetaminophen, aka Tylenol, is a placebo effect. Why isn't this recognized by more doctors? It kills 16,000 people a year and is liver toxic. From what I hear, acetaminophen is twice as liver toxic as the most liver toxic steroid there is, oxymetholone, aka anadrol, which is only given in 50 milligrams at the most. You mean to children. And Tylenol, twice as liver toxic milligram per milligram, is given in 325 milligram tablets, being low dosed. 16,000 dead people is a decent number, and for a drug that is liver toxic, then even be unnecessary to take a placebo effect. Why isn't this more widely investigated? Are most doctors refusing to acknowledge this, at least in America anyways? You have a few facts wrong there. First of all, anadrol is only been found to be liver toxic in studies when combined with alcohol drinkers. Even casual drinkers, someone who's prescribed anadrol, men who are prescribed it, who drink alcohol even moderately, as very recreational or social drinkers, see elevated liver enzymes. You do not combine even 1 or 2 drinks a week with oral anabolics. Number 2, your 50 milligrams, that's the prescription for children. Adults, it ranges anywhere from starting at 50, and in some cases 300 to 500 milligrams per day are prescribed for certain medical conditions in adult males. Depending upon their body weight, it can go up to 500, but that's relatively rare. So your facts aren't correct there. So even if Tylenol is twice as liver toxic as that, it shouldn't be as big of a deal at even similar doses for non-alcohol drinkers. But you are right, Tylenol is dangerous. Why something that is that dangerous is over the counter when it is possible placebo, that is subject to a lot of debate, is really beyond me. And it is dangerous. And in fact, it's a warning on this because my mother used to work in ICU in a hospital as a registered nurse years ago, and they would get ICU patients who were people who attempted to suicide themselves on Tylenol, and she said it is generally one of the most painful ways, it's actually the most painful way she's ever seen for anyone to commit suicide. She said it's just terrible because they usually live in the ICU for a week and they have to pump them full of morphine due to the pain while they go ahead and die. It's not like you just overdose on sleeping pills and you don't wake up. It takes about a week or so to kill you after your liver shuts down and your body starts dying from the toxicity. So yeah, it is pretty bad. If you take too many, you're in a world of trouble. You're probably going to have a painful death. So why this is over the counter and all sorts of other stuff aren't, given the fact of that it is possibly placebo, it's of wide debate there. And it is quite dangerous when large amounts are taken. And you're right, it does kill 16,000 people per year. I don't know why it is over the counter. I can't give you a good reason for that, why that's over the counter and lots of stuff isn't. I wish I knew. All right, next question. Hey Jason, can you make gains while training around RPE of less than 8? i.e. doing reps until bar speed feels slow and weight feels heavier than when you started, / forms starting to break. At RPE 7, the bar really sitting slow. You should have good bar speed all the way through. So I don't know where you're getting less than RPE 8, but can you make good hypertrophy training at RPE 8 all the time? Which basically means you're leaving about 2 reps in the tank on every single set you do. Yes, absolutely. As long as progressive overload is there, you're providing enough total mechanical tension and enough metabolic fatigue, which means, i.e., you're doing enough total reps in a workout and you're lifting a heavy enough weight, you should be able to see very good hypertrophy. You don't necessarily need to go higher than RPE 8 to see really good gains in muscle mass, provided volume, tension, and workload are sufficient. All right, next question. So if we switch from the caveman diet towards our modern diet, we live longer? There's a running joke, a meme on that, which I hope most of you people have seen by now. Is that a factor into why we have so many different cancer sicknesses and other life-threatening things? It's just a long enough time frame to catch something. That is a factor with one of the reasons you do see certain diseases that exist at higher rates now versus Paleolithic man is the fact that we do live a lot longer. So yeah, that absolutely is a factor. Now, a lot of our dietary habits do kill us, but the thing that people died from, the caveman diet, malnutrition was one of the leading causes of death, followed by infections, so lack of antibiotics. So it didn't necessarily mean that the modern diet is healthier, other than at least you won't die of malnutrition. So in a way, that is a contributing factor, but medicine, modern medicine has been one of the other massive contributing factors there. But yeah, that is true. Some diseases that we get in the modern world, a lot of them are lifestyle induced because we are sedentary. We do eat excessive empty calories. And so we do develop some obesity and things, but those things all tie together. But at the same time, we do get access to better nutrition, more total nutrition. At least we don't die of malnutrition. So that it does factor in with us actually living longer. And again, while some of the diseases are bad lifestyle induced, some of them are still a product of living longer. That if Paleolithic men just had access to more calories, weren't starving to death, had access to antibiotics, they would of course developed many of these later life diseases if their average lifespan was high enough to do so at similar rates. Barring the ones that are a result of a sedentary lifestyle, which they didn't have, which is a massive factor. All right, next question. Is the sumo deadlift good for bringing up a pair of lagging hamstrings? You know, you have different tools available to do different jobs, and while I do like big heavy compounds to bring up lagging hamstrings, I wouldn't necessarily use the sumo deadlift as my primary tool there. I don't recommend that. It sounds like a bodybuilding issue. You have a hypertrophy issue. I don't generally recommend the sumo deadlift to most people with those type of goals. A conventional deadlift is going to put more overall meat on you. And if the sumo deadlift isn't going to put more muscle tissue on your hamstrings than the conventional, is subject to debate. It will cause more hypertrophy at the quads and the hips. How much difference it will cause in things like the hamstring and the glutes is actually really subject to a lot of debate. So that being said, if you're not getting enough hamstring development off the conventional deadlift, my go-to fix wouldn't be to switch to the sumo, which is just more hip and quad dominant and less back dominant. My fix would be to go to a more hamstring specific deadlift. I would switch to something like a Romanian deadlift as an example. That would be a much better solution than switching to sumo for your main deadlift and losing the benefits of the conventional deadlift for your development. If you got lagging hamstrings you want to bring up, just add in a Romanian deadlift if the conventional deadlift isn't getting the job done, rather than something that's debatable as to if it's better. We know the Romanian deadlift is going to put more tension and a myostatic reflex on the hamstrings. All right, next question. Why don't more people, bodybuilders and powerlifters, squat to the depth of an Olympic squat? I haven't seen any of the YouTube viewers promoting squatting to such a depth either. The reason for it is that, number one, not everyone can squat to that depth safely. People can argue about that all day long, but there are people who can barely get to parallel due to their hip structure and their body structure, who really going an inch below parallel is probably the most depth they will ever be able to get through messing with mobility and flexibility. It has to do with hip structure. These people do exist. There are tons of them, and they can't safely squat much deeper than that. And obviously those people with that sort of structure probably aren't going to do well at Olympic lifting, because some of the Olympic lifts, the techniques themselves, require you to be able to squat really deep as part of the movement. They're integral to being a good weightlifter. So it's part of the genetics required to be good at it. So those people don't make the cut. So not everyone can do that. Number two, most people are doing relatively deep squats, either for powerlifters' purposes to get stronger on the squat for competition. If they don't need to squat that deep for competition, they're learning a technique that isn't going to be helpful for their sport. Someone who's doing it for hypertrophy, odds are they're getting all the glute stimulation they need from their squats and deadlifts. They don't necessarily need more glute development. And by squatting much deeper like that with an Olympic squat, you may just be stimulating additional glute hypertrophy with no other hypertrophy benefits in the other muscles. You may not be putting any more additional workload and tension on the quads the hips, things like that, muscles you're actually trying to hypertrophy, just the glutes, potentially, at least some data I've seen over the years has suggested that once you go below parallel, every inch deeper only seems to give more glute activation as far as we can tell, but that's, again, subject to debate. But that is what I seem to have read over the years. So it's an issue of they're not trying to focus on making the glutes as massive as possible purely from the squat. They're more concerned with leg development, which a parallel squat will give you very, very good leg development. In fact, if you do them correctly, for some people that might be all they need in order to reach their quadricep development goals for their overall development and balance of their physique. So those are the reasons. All right, next question. How to succeed in making a decent following on YouTube without selling out. The people who I saw who didn't sell out, at least for the longest time, they've started getting into more of this stuff now. But if you want someone to use as a good model for that, the Hodge twins became very, very successful before they started doing the supplement thing or the Gymshark thing or any of that. They were very successful. They pretty much set the standard for what you could do without selling out. They made it. They did it. And they did that by being entertainers, putting out quality, entertaining material. Now, as to whether it was good advice or not, it was subject to debate. A lot of it wasn't good advice, but it doesn't matter. They're charismatic. They had a shtick. It worked. They entertained people. Most of us enjoyed them. I enjoyed them. Even if I didn't agree with what they were saying, I enjoyed a lot of their early work. I thought it was hilarious. It was entertaining enough to keep me coming back. That's important. So you need to be entertaining enough to draw people in. The selling out thing is purely about making extra money on the side and being promoted. It's not necessarily part of your main YouTube thing. So as long as you have a good channel that is either very entertaining or informative and you can market yourself and put yourself out there and you will work at it long enough and hard enough, you'll probably be fairly successful. But what you consider a big following might vary. I don't consider my following big enough, and other people I know have struggled to get anywhere near where the following of this channel is at. To them, that seems unobtainable. Whereas for me, I see a lot of channels I interact with larger followings than Juggernaut Fitness TV, and I'm still working on trying to get it to where they're at. But it's also an issue of time. The main thing to remember is that you've got to have content that draws people in for some reason. You've got to be consistent with it, and you've got to do it long enough. It is a patience game. All right, next question. Your take on the idea that kids such as middle school, high school should be taught how to correctly to perform movements such as squat, deadlift, and bench press in your average phys-ed class, not just those who are on a sports team. I like this idea. Now, obviously, you have to have PE teachers who are competent to teach the lifts, which could be the biggest issue. But assuming they are, and this is part of the curriculum to become a PE teacher for high school and middle school students, I think this is a wonderful idea, because weight training and heavy weight training with free weights could resolve a lot of the health issues and problems that we have in countries like the United States with obesity and diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancers. All these things could help mitigate those risks for the general populace. So if you could teach people to do these things early and teach them that the heavy free weights are part of being healthy and fit, and they're taught these things correctly in school, even if it's just for a short time in a course, you could instill that, and it could have a positive effect on the larger demographic as a result. So I would absolutely support something like that. I think it's a wonderful idea, assuming the actual teacher is competent to do so. All right, next question. And this is the final question of the week. What is your opinion on a recent discussion I had with Ian McCarthy on his page? In it, he stated that bodybuilders should spend the majority of their training performing isolation movements over compounds. He also told me I should replace the deadlifts, barbell rows, and weighted chin-ups for cable pull-ins and pullovers. LOL. Okay, I'm not going to bash Ian on this because I didn't see the conversation. I don't know for a fact that Ian said this. I don't want my subscribers to assume by default Ian said this unless you actually saw him do it on his page yourself. I don't care if someone has a screenshot or something else. A screenshot doesn't prove that someone said something. People make fake accounts all the time to imitate people. So I don't want you to base it upon that. What I will say, let's assume that anyone said this, doesn't have to be anybody out there, made a statement similar to what you said. I would say that that's absurd. I would say that from a training economy perspective, you should be doing big, heavy compounds for the majority of your time in the gym because it will stimulate the most muscle mass. Bodybuilders, their training is there for two purposes: to stimulate large amounts of muscle growth through the whole body and to then balance that muscle growth out. The big compounds are going to give you the most growth for every minute or hour you spend in the gym. The isolation movements and the stuff he suggested would be good for people who have a weakness, but they're going to put less total size on you. So unless they're specifically addressing an imbalance, you should never choose an exercise that puts less size on you if your goal is to gain as much muscle as you can and be balanced. You should only consider movements that aren't putting maximum size on you through multiple muscle groups when they directly address a possible muscle imbalance or an aesthetic imbalance in terms of your aesthetics for bodybuilders. It doesn't make sense to do them outside of that context. So having you replace those big efficient compounds that put a large amount of muscle on you for these little fluffier exercises that put less size on you for the amount of time you do them for the same number of total reps and sets is just absurd. It makes no sense from a training economy or an efficiency perspective at all. It doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense in the context of addressing muscle imbalances that are starting to develop or that exist already. So it shouldn't be most of your exercises by any means because your whole body's not imbalanced. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go. Stupid fan. Alright, let me move the fan and do that again. Oh, Mount Bicepius.